Hello and welcome once again to Strong at Home. I'm Dr. Brenda Murphy, an educational psychologist with Sailway Learning and Academy. We are here to help you find ways to be strong at home with your children, no matter what situation they're in, whether they are or have been in public or private school, whether you're homeschooling or whether you're a grandparent who is taking responsibility either full-time or part-time for your grandchild. We are here to bring encouragement and conversation to you. So today we are continuing a conversation with a very special person in my life, Joann Nabb. Welcome, Joann, and welcome back to Strong at Home. In our first conversation together, I shared that this is the first time you and I have had any contact in many, 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 many years as a workshop that you conducted at a homeschool convention in, we determined, 1989 in Raleigh, North Carolina. You gave a piece of advice to me that has held me in good stead through thick and thin, through my homeschool adventure, my adventure as a founder and principal of a private school, through my doctoral studies. And your advice at that time was, when you don't know and your children ask you a question, you are truthful with them and you say, I don't know. And you didn't stop there. You said, let's find out. So in that same spirit, Joann, there's a lot that I don't know about your amazing life as a homeschool educator. So let's find out. So let's continue our conversation.
Yeah.
You had started telling us a little bit about your children.
Mhm.
And so you have 6 children. They're all grown now, and a few grandchildren, just like I have. So tell us a little bit more about your homeschool adventure.
Well, I had told about the first 2 boys, so then there was a girl, and she was very textbook student. Oh my word. I could give her anything and she would do it right away and do it well and we'd be done. So she was a very easy student. And then after her came a son who was very intelligent, but was also, I couldn't quite figure him out. He didn't really seem to like to work, even though he could do the work very quickly and very well. So most of the time we'd all be sitting at the table and he was very quiet. And he'd get his work done and we'd all be working away. And all of a sudden we'd look up and we'd all go, where did Adrian go? So then we'd have to find him. And a lot of times he was just hiding under the table. At the time, we didn't really have a floor. We didn't have carpet and we didn't really have anything nice on the floor. It was just the particle board type flooring or something. Well, he was usually down on the floor drawing pictures on the floor or writing on the floor, which was fine because it was not a floor.
Yeah.
And so, one of the kids or me would say, you need to get back in your chair or whatever. And he needed a standing desk. He needed something where he did not have to sit. So even though he wasn't wiggly or noisy like that second son, he still didn't like sitting. So most of the time I let him stand to do the work at the table, which was fine. But he was really, really good at sneaking away. So we had to find him all the time. And many times he just snuck off to put his nose in a book. He loved to read.
Isn't that amazing how sometimes when we think that they may be up to kind of no good, and in reality, they are just finding things that are satisfying their desires to know something else.
Yes, and he was. He read, and now we had a lot of books because that was what I based my curriculum on, basically books and games. I know that sounds terrible, but we played so many learning games. And so he'd be off reading, and he read every single book in our entire collection, and we had about 8 bookshelves full.
Oh, my.
Yes, and he read through the Bible 3 times, completely head to toe. I don't know how he managed to do all that reading, but probably when he was sneaking off. But he never was missed in his work. It was done. It wasn't always done up to the. But he was very smart, and he got it done. So that was my 4th son. Go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yeah, this is something that has continues to strike me as an educator is getting your work done. And here at Sailaway in our academy, I've been trying to ban that term because work in many ways has a connotation of just something that's an obligation and not a joy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to, I have not been terribly successful, I have to admit, but it does kind of think an obligation of a task that has to be done, but not something that's building and developing us. That's part of something that becomes important to our life experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I'm sorry to interrupt your story. I think about my oldest son, who was wonderful in school, and he was in public school, and we took him out of public school and put him in private school, and then for different reasons brought him home for a year. And so he was very accustomed to working in workbooks. So I had him working in a workbook, and check mark, everything was perfect, right? Just like your son. And my field is literacy, all forms of literacy. And so I thought, well, he was always finished with his work. Let me just give him an assignment based on what he had just finished getting 100 on, like 10 worksheets. Well, when I gave him an application that wasn't a task that was in the workbook, it was evident that he had not learned that. It was in grammar. He had not learned that and was not able to apply that in practical application, whether it be a learning situation or a non-learning situation. So part of my educational theory has been, and I know from our conversation that rather than just kind of completing the work, I think your children, somehow you were doing something to make it more than just a workbook. Is my suspicion correct?
We actually rarely used workbooks, rarely. And it was almost only my daughter who was the one who just got all her other stuff done so quickly that she just needed something to keep her busy sometimes. So she had her own special little collection of workbooks that were more fun than really learning the workbooks, because one, they were not all that available when I started.
Right.
Secondly, I really didn't like them because of what you just said. You learn all this rote stuff, but you haven't learned to think it. And I wanted them to think. I wanted them to learn how to think.
Yes.
So at mealtime on Monday nights, I would put a question on the table. It was a think question. And it would be something simple when they were younger, like, why does a rat have a tail? And then they would have all week to find the answer. And then on Friday night, I'd get a little crown that I had made out of felt out, and I would my husband would ask everybody, okay, what answers did you get for the think question? And so they'd all offer what they thought the reason was for a rat having a tail, or whatever the question was. And whoever had the best answer got to wear the crown for the rest of the meal. And I mean, the real reason is they have it for balance. It's not really a very in-depth reason, but it forced them to make that effort to look for an answer, to find it for themselves. And it forced them to research, if you want to call it that, at a very young age, because I wanted them to be able to find answers. I wanted them to think through why something might be the way it is. Why did God create the giraffe with a very long neck? I mean, there are so many potential think questions that exist in this world that we never ran out of them.
Yeah.
And so that kind of thing we would do. So no, we really did not. I did not base any of our curriculum on a workbook.
Yeah. I've always considered workbooks as tools for teachers. In other words, teachers teach, not workbooks. And
Right.
Sometimes a workbook is just a real good way for someone to reinforce a topic that you've been working on, just to kind of give a little more opportunity to engage with that information. And that's about it, because I think when you just take a workbook and go through it page by page and all the children are doing is filling it in, the thing that they are learning is how to fill in a worksheet.
Right. They're not thinking.
They're not thinking at all. So how are some of the others? I interrupted you about your daughter.
Okay.
So let me get back to the children.
Okay.
maybe stay on track and learn some of your wisdom from your years of homeschool.
Well, after the son, who was very quiet and just a little bit sneaky about getting away from the table whenever he could, then came a daughter, and she was exceedingly organized. She was our secretary. She would tell us what dates we had that day, what time our piano lessons were. She would run all the organizational part of the family. I absolutely loved her. She was so helpful in making sure we stayed on track. And but I remember one time, she was in high school at this point, but one time in high school, she was sitting at the table just working away, and I had given her books to read, and she had a certain amount of books she had to read each week or each month or whatever, and she just burst into tears. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, honey, what's wrong?" And she said, "You make me work way too hard." So I said, "Well, then let's take some stuff off." So we went through her whole schedule, and I said, "How about we get rid of this?" "Well, no, I think that's interesting." "Well, how about we get rid of this?" "Well, no, that's interesting too." "Well, I'll tell you what, let's just push this to the side and we'll pick it up again in a month." "No, I like doing that." Anyway, we got through the whole thing, and she looked at me and said, "I think I'll just do it all. It's really good."
I love it. I love it. Yes. And you know, for those of you that are watching, that is one of the joys of homeschooling, that take aside all the content and their academic advancement. Those are the moments that individuals or parents who are not with their children in an academic environment or more time never have the opportunity to experience. And those are such growing times with our children. What a wonderful experience. And she had you, Joann, to bounce this off with in a safe environment.
Mhm.
And in the process, she learned something really important about herself.
She did. She did.
Now that, and then probably after that, she even took on more and enjoyed it more. Yeah.
Yep. Oh,
I know, there's that daughter. So let's continue on with the next one.
so the last child, the last son, he initially he seemed to have sort of a learning disability. So I took him to get his eyes checked and see if there was something wrong, and there was. He would read. He would not see all the little words, the, of, in. He wouldn't see those. And then he would also start out reading the beginning of a sentence, but then he would jump to the end, then back to the middle, then to another, sort of the middle of the end.
Yeah.
He would, like the little brown house in the woods was a cabin. He would read it as the cabin, and then he would read the woods, and then he would read little, and then he would read brown maybe, and it was so all over the place. And so at the end of reading the sentence all mixed up, I would ask him if he comprehended what the sentence said, and he would say, "Well, I think it's about a brown house that's a cabin." So he would somehow get it all reorganized in his brain, but as a result he was extremely slow at reading because it took him so long to piece together what he was reading when he was reading it so abstractly.
Oh, yes.
So it was very hard to get him to read, but he loved it when I read to him. And I always read aloud to the kids all the time. I mean, at lunchtime, they'd eat, I'd read. I mean, it was just a great, it kept it quiet over lunch. It was very good.
I have to interrupt because we did the same thing. The only thing that was the problem is when we would read sad books, I'd start crying in the middle of your lunch.
Yeah. And then they would all say to me, "Oh, Mom's crying again. We just have to wait for her to stop." Oh, it was horrible.
And then as my second son, as he began to be more fluent in reading, he'd just take it and read it so that they could finish it. So if you're, those of you out there, there are all sorts of emotions that our children get to experience in us, and so just embrace that. Yeah. So okay, so we were talking about that son, and that's I would. Well, actually, the research that I did when I was working in my doctoral studies about homeschooling wasn't all about homeschooling, but some of my study is that a substantial number of people choose to homeschool because they have children like your last son, like your youngest son. And they say that about anywhere from 30 to 45% of the families choose to homeschool that are homeschooling have a child that is struggling in some way with some form of learning, maybe not necessarily identified as learning disabled or PPD, which is a very profound developmental delay. And in reality, in the general population, there's only about 10% or less of students that have learning issues like your son. But in the homeschool population, it's much larger. Many people, so many of the people who I assume are watching Strong at Home need those questions answered and be assured that, and your son had a significant reading problem. I can tell you that right now, as you well know.
Yeah.
And yet he overcomes. So continue on with his story, because that's so encouraging to families out there.
Well, I did have to pretty much relearn homeschooling with him, because every other of my children, I had been able to fairly much do it the same. You know, I told you with my second son, I had to use a few more other bigger motor skill methods to get him to get his math done and that sort of thing, when I would, you know, tape the papers all over the house with his problems on it. But most of the children were not difficult to teach, and I managed. But with my last one, oh, it was such a new learning curve for me. And we did everything we could think of, and I would sometimes just hold his hand to help him learn to write better, and just to not grammatically, but just to actually the motor skill of writing. And so there were a lot of props I had to use. There are a lot of like dyslexic type props out there that I would use, where you have the clear ruler so they can look through the clear ruler at the one line they're supposed to read and not see all these other words on the page that distract them. So there were a lot of things I had to do to relearn teaching. But he did finally really just catch on to things, because when he did finally get to college, and he did not start college until he was 22, because he just wasn't quite ready. He took a lot of classes at the local community college for his first years out of high school to help him just get his electives taken care of, or excuse me, his
required courses.
Required courses, sorry.
That's okay.
And, so we did that because we knew if he were carrying a full heavy load at college, it might be overwhelming for him. So when he finally went to college, he went to North Carolina State University, and he chose to study industrial design, which is a 4-year study. So we knew no matter when he went, it would have to be a 4-year study, but it's a very hands-on study. They only select 75 people per student per year, 75 students per year to enter the program. And it is a very hands-on, very low-level textbook class, but you have some, not many. And he would call me up on the weekend and say, Mom, we've got this huge project due on Monday. And I would say, oh, wow, you must be busy. He'd say, oh, no, I finished it already. And I would say, wow, that's so good. And he would say, well, if I did 10 pages on Monday and 10 pages on Tuesday and 10 on Wednesday, by the time Friday came, I had all the reading done. And then Saturday morning, I went to the lab and I got all the building done. And you know, Mom, all the other students, they save everything till Sunday night. And then they're up all night trying to finish this project. And that's what he learned because of his slowness. He learned how to work ahead and be incredibly organized, something I don't know I could have ever taught him if I had been teaching him the normal way.
Absolutely. You were teaching him that skill in a different way. And we had an expert on learning, Dr. Kathy Greenberg, and there are what she calls meta-strategic knowledge, and they are strategies to help you turn what she calls stumbling blocks into stepping stones.
Yes.
And you, between the two of you, you've discovered some of these strategies, and he was able to put it in place. And you know what, Joann? We are way over time. That's okay, because this was an incredible story, a very powerful story. And I would like to continue our conversation. However, we're going to end for today, but I am going to end with our blessing, because that's the way that every Strong at Home session conversation will end, so that if nothing else, as you are joining us, we know that today will be a day in which the Lord will bless you and keep you. that the Lord will make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you, and that the Lord would lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So peace to you today, Joann, and to all of you out there. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.